Disclaimer, I will be discussing a lot of sensitive and possibly triggering matters on this episode. So if you are around children or if certain topics make you feel uncomfortable, I would suggest you skip this episode. Throughout society, Black men, TM, have historically been vilified and dehumanized. Their actions and desires have been weaponized to uphold systems of racial control. And as I mentioned last week, on the Black Lives episode, there are many reasons why Black men have been drawn to white women inclusively and exclusively. So by introducing their complicated relationships with white women, these layers deepen. However, myths and laws were used to police them from these unions. Enduring racial profiling and systemic oppression worked tirelessly to keep them down, ensuring that love itself became a battleground. Now, we've seen this time and time again through the years and decades and centuries. Like Marcus Dixon's legal battle over a consensual encounter with a white classmate magnified the lingering biases embedded in society, while Jack Johnson's defiant marriage to Lucille Cameron challenged the norms of his time, causing him to face time. Even in the 1960s, Chubby Checker's love for a beauty queen faced resistance, and Sammy Davis Jr.'s romance with Kim Novak almost had him killed. So while interracial relationships today are more accepted, they still face the weight of historical trauma and face scrutiny tied to stereotypes and privilege. And soon, Welcome to another episode of I Will Tell You What, the podcast that's all love, Black history. I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that shares these stories with you every Monday. Turn on the notifications after you hit subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow the show wherever you are on all of the places. Please leave us a podcast review no matter where you actually enjoy I'll Tell You What. And share this with a friend. And of course, join us on Patreon to become a true all runner and help support the show. Now let's reflect on the very heavy history and complicated reality of the Black man and the white woman. He said it was consensual, but in 2003, a jury of 9 found 18-year-old high school senior Marcus Dixon guilty of, quote, statutory rape, a misdemeanor, and aggravated child molestation, a felony. Marcus Dixon's story is a haunting, chilling example of how racism can devastate lives. Like I said, let's go back 22 years to 2003. Marcus was a star athlete in Rome, Georgia that had a football scholarship to go to Vanderbilt. Then he had consensual sex with a 15-year-old white classmate named Christy Brown. He said she told him, quote, my dad cannot find out about us having sex because he'll kill us both. Her father would find out anyway, and days later, Marcus said he was arrested in the principal's office. Former ESPN writer Greg Garber wrote, quote, prosecutors charged the football star with 6 counts: rape, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, sexual battery, statutory rape, and aggravated child molestation. Now, for those that are not aware of Rome, Georgia, where all of this took place, let me share with you the demographics as of the 2000 census. Then, the city was nearly 60% white, 28% Black, and 10% Latino. The median household income was a little over $30,000, and in the most recent presidential election, over 70% of the vote went towards Trump. That area is also represented by 6B, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So Garber wrote, quote, despite both admitting the encounter was consensual, Dixon was charged with statutory rape and aggravated child molestation under Georgia's rigid laws regarding age and sexual relationships. Essentially, Marcus would be sentenced to 10 years without parole because even though they were both students, Christy was 15, and with Marcus being 18, he was technically an adult. The harsh punishment sparked nationwide outrage, as many argued that racial stereotypes had unfairly shaped the case. Even Oprah was drawn to this story and had an episode on it with him after he was released. Do y'all remember that? Because I do. I remember seeing that when I was in high school. Regardless, this was such a huge story in Georgia, nationwide, but definitely in Georgia. Folks drew parallels to the history of Black men forever being disproportionately punished for interactions with white women, often based on deep-seated prejudices rather than the fact. So after 15 months in prison, Marcus's conviction was partially overturned by the Georgia Supreme Court in 2004. In a narrow 4-3 decision, the court ruled that the aggravated child molestation charge was inapplicable, although the lesser statutory rape charge remained. By then, the damage had been done. Marcus lost his scholarship to Vanderbilt, but what God has for you is for you. Marcus received a scholarship to Hampton University, where he played, and later was picked up as an undrafted free agent for the Dallas Cowboys in 2008, which started his 7-year NFL playing career. Now, he's the defensive line coach for the Minnesota Vikings and won a Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams as an assistant coach in 2021. Overall, Marcus Dixon's case continues to be a reminder of how race and law intersect to perpetuate injustice. He wasn't the only one, obviously, that would deal with the law because of his involvement with a white woman. Now let's get into what happened with boxer Jack Johnson. They wanted Jack Johnson's love of white women to be the reason for his downfall. First, let me answer, who is Jack Johnson? Jack, born John Johnson, I know, is known for being the first Black heavyweight champion. When he beat James Jeffries in 1910, it literally caused riots across the entire country. White folks were so upset that this Black man beat their fave. Another thing about Jack is that he loved him some white women, okay? After 2 Black women broke his heart, one who just broke up with him after a minor argument, and another that left him for a colleague and then came back to him and then left him again, he decided he was never going to date Black women ever again. I know. After that, he would marry white women several times. He was also not big on monogamy, but that would come back to bite later. So take all that in mind when you hear about his marriage to Lucille Cameron, an 18-year-old S-worker he turned into his secretary when he was 34. Also, side note, don't she look like a certain basketball player, or is it just me? Anywho. He was seen with her less than a month after his first wife committed the side of Sue. So clearly, this was a time when interracial relationships were illegal. Jack didn't care. His decision to be with these white women without any F's to give became a reason for white folks, and I'm sure some Black folks too, to be mad. After Lucille's mother learned of their relationship, she was pissed off. She accused Jack of kidnapping and corrupting her daughter, though Lucille denied these claims. In fall 1912, Jack was arrested for violating the Mann Act, a federal law that exists to this day that was designed to combat human trafficking, but frequently was exploited to criminalize interracial relationships. But while he was out on bail, Jack and Lucille got married. The trial took place the following May, and y'all, they brought out his ex, Belle Schreiber. And not just any old ex, but like, this was a girl that sat on the bench. She was the practice squad boo. If you know, you know. So with that, you got a woman who likely wanted to take her disappointment in how he treated her to the stand. And because this was all recorded in the court of law, Belle likely wanted to show herself in the best light, saying that she used him more than he used her. Okay, girl, I read the books. I saw the articles. I know, but regardless. So to make an example out of him, in 1913, Jack was convicted of transporting women across state lines for, quote, immoral purposes. Sentenced to a year and a day in prison, Jack fled the country with Lucille, living in exile for several years before ultimately returning to serve his sentence. And their marriage eventually crumbled 12 years later because Lucille said he cheated on her. Jack's situation was clearly another example of how the holders and influencers of the law hoped to take him down just because he loved him some white women. Obviously, white people were not keen on blacks engaging in miscegenation, but black people weren't either, especially when it happened in the family. What would you do if your own mama publicly begged to God to stop your wedding from happening? That was the reality for Chubby Checker, who found himself caught between love and family. Ernest Evans, better known as Chubby Checker, was a star during that wababa-loobop-badop-bamboo era. He was the man that put a twist on the twist, and that's the version that took off, and we all remember. His career was booming when, in January 1913, he met a beauty queen from Harlem. Not Harlem, like Harlem, New York, but Harlem, Netherlands. Her name is Katharina Lauders, and she was doing pageant work because she had just been crowned Miss World 1962 just 2 months before. And then she was in the Philippines doing the work. And Chubby was there too, also doing work. The exact start of their relationship is unclear, but by October 1963, the two of them were spotted together in London. When reporters asked Chubby about marriage, he said something along the lines of, quote, "I'm too young to get married." Yet just 2 months later, on December 12, 1963, Chubby proposed and Katharina said yes. At the time, she was 21 and he was 22. Now, think about it. You are a baby adult. You have a career that's made you a household name. You make all this money where you can take care of your family and spoil them. And now you've found love. She might not be black like you, but you don't care. You see past that despite how most people would feel. And you just hope that everyone would be happy for you. You would hope wrong. In 1964, rumors swirled that their engagement was off. The reason for that rumor might have been tied back to one person, Chubby's mama. Y'all, Mrs. Evans was not a fan of this engagement. One could say she was pissed. Yeah. So much so that she decided one Sunday to show up to church wearing a mink coat that he got her. She sat through the entire sermon, and as it ended, she stood up and asked, could she address the congregation, saying, quote, "I want you all to pray with me this morning that God keeps my son from getting married to that white girl. She's ruining his life." She went on, quote, "Just because Ernest is my son doesn't make him any different. He should marry a girl of his own color. This girl doesn't really love him. She's just marrying him because he's Chubby Checker." Now, Chubby heard what his mama did and moved out of the family house and went into hiding. Now, Katharina, who was also staying with the family briefly, was kicked out by Mrs. Evans, who said, quote, "I told him I couldn't stand her around here anymore." The backlash wasn't limited to his family. Chubby was booed at an NAACP benefit performance and canceled the event. His mother twisted the knife, saying, quote, "That's what he gets. That girl has wrecked his career and scandalized his family. She's nothing, just nothing, and she's nasty." Mrs. Evans blamed Katharina for driving a wedge between her and her son, accusing her of taking him away from the church. Despite the hurtful words, Chubby stood firm, and on April 12, 1964, Chubby and Katharina tied the knot. And as for Mrs. Evans, Chubby said she got over it and that he resolved everything, saying that the real problem was the language barrier between the two. I don't know how true that is or not, but I guess it really doesn't matter because Chubby and Katharina had 3 kids and they are still married today. So what do y'all think about this? And you know, I can't tell you about black men that dealt with the consequences of being with white women without telling you about Sammy Davis Jr. and Kim Novak. So let's head there. They did not want that black man with that glass eye around their precious Hollywood darling. The story of Sammy Davis Jr. and Kim Novak was a romance that became a time in 1950s America where race, power, and fame created mess, child. Mess. The relationship was as daring as it was dangerous, playing out in a world that saw their interracial relationship as a scandal rather than a simple matter of the heart. Then, Sammy Davis Jr. was already one of the most celebrated black entertainers of his time. He met Kim Novak, a white actress under contract with Columbia Pictures in 1956, and connected thanks to Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh. Sammy was a charismatic, multi-talented performer who captivated audiences on stage and on screen. Kim was seen as a Hollywood blonde bombshell, known for films like Hitchcock's Vertigo. They started dating after that, which led to a gossip column to write a blind item about that. All blind items today, no biggie, as long as they're not too nefarious. But blind items back then, especially about a black and Puerto Rican man and a star on the rise as whites, that is a problem. That is a very serious problem. So at the time, Harry Cohn, who was the head of Columbia Pictures, controlled Kim's image and career. He did not like them together at all. When word got out about her relationship with Sammy, Harry feared public backlash and the potential fallout for his studio. We can't go messing up the money now, can we? Right. So what does he do? He reportedly calls on the mob to persuade Sammy out of the relationship. AKA, Harry put a hit out on Sammy, allegedly. Quote, they said they would break both of his legs, put out his other eye, and bury him in a hole, said Sammy's friend Arthur Silber. Shook from that threat, Sammy knew he had to do something, and do something soon. So on January 10th, 1958, Sammy orchestrated a sham wedding with a black woman he dated a few times named Lorraine White. Sammy paid her several thousands of dollars, called up Harry Belafonte to be his best man, and got married in Las Vegas. That night, he got so drunk and threatened to unalive himself while also physically hurting Lorraine by trying to choke her out. So it should be no surprise to you that this was said to be a very loveless union, a business arrangement, if you will. This fake marriage would end on April 23rd, 1959. Meanwhile, after sneaking around with Sammy to keep their relationship together, Kim was reportedly ordered to cut ties with Sammy to protect her career. So it was over. Many years later, Kim's camp wanted to put the word out that she, quote, never wanted to get married back then to anyone. In another article from her team, it seemed that while there was mutual interest between the two, Sammy was more interested in her than she was in him. So, the moral of this story is that the relationship of Sammy Davis Jr. and Kim Novak almost cost him his life. Here we go with another example of how black affection was weaponized just because of who it was directed towards. Sad. Black men have long borne the weight of historical trauma and relentless scrutiny by just existing. They have been cast as threats to societal order. They have been stripped of their agency. Their actions and desires have been weaponized to uphold white supremacy. Relationships with white women, though often the catalyst for violence and oppression against them, are just one layer of the systemic forces that have targeted black men for centuries. From the days of enslavement, black men were portrayed as dangerous and hypersexual to justify their subjugation. These stereotypes were codified into laws and societal norms designed to dehumanize them. The false narratives laid the the groundwork for myths and fears that criminalize Black men for their interactions with white women. The brutal lynching of Emmett Till in 1955 after a false accusation of flirting with a white woman became the most infamous example of how society weaponized these fears to uphold racial hierarchies. Similarly, Mack Charles Parker was lynched in 1959 after being accused, without evidence, of raping a white woman. These events reflect a history where mere allegations were often a death sentence for Black men. Marcus Dixon's story exemplifies how this legacy persists. In 2003, Marcus, a promising high school senior with a future in football, was wrongly convicted of aggravated child molestation after a consensual encounter with a white classmate. And though his conviction was later overturned, the case underscored how systemic racism continues to punish Black men disproportionately. Henry Morrow's 1970 murder in Oxford, North Carolina, following an accusation of just speaking disrespectfully to a white woman, shows how violence against Black men for perceived transgressions did not end with the civil rights era. The story of Jack Johnson, the first Black heavyweight boxing champion, is another stark example of how society targeted Black men who refused to conform. Jack's relationships with white women ignited outrage, leading to his conviction under the Mann Act in 1913. His crime? Just defying racial boundaries set up by people that don't look like him. Jack's life became a symbol of the lengths to which society would go to punish Black men for stepping outside the rules prescribed to them. And even in the entertainment industry, Black men faced unique challenges. Chubby Checker, who revolutionized dance with the twist, faced harsh opposition from his own mama when he fell in love with Catharina Lotters, a white Dutch beauty queen. The personal became political as his family and society grappled with his rejection of racial norms. Sammy Davis Jr.'s romance with actress Kim Novak revealed the deadly stakes of such defiance. Threatened by mob violence and forced into a sham marriage, Sammy's life was nearly ended by the societal and systemic forces that policed his relationships. And perhaps this is why so many feel the way that they feel about Stephen Twitch Boss, his wife, Alison Holker, in her recent appearances in the news. As she's promoting her upcoming memoir, disparaging in, can I truthfully say, unnecessary stories around the death of Twitch and the events that occurred afterwards, have essentially just aired dirty laundry of a man who's not even here to defend himself. This enforces the assumption that even the safe spaces for Black men in their bonds with white women can just be weaponized later, albeit intentionally or not. So these stories illuminate the broader narrative of Black men's experiences under a system designed to revile and control them. Interracial relationships, while a powerful lens for examining these dynamics, are ultimately just one thread in a larger fabric of historical trauma. Understanding this history requires acknowledging the ongoing impact of stereotypes, dismantling systemic oppression, and honoring the resilience of Black men who have endured unimaginable scrutiny simply for existing. But tell me, what do you think? And that, All Runners, concludes this episode of I'll Tell You What. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, share, leave a podcast review wherever you get your podcasts, even if you don't get your podcast and you watch on the Tube of You or TikTok or Instagram or somewhere else. And definitely, as you know, come back for another episode in Love Black History next week. See you in the pews.